Welcome to the Kurt and Kenny podcast. Coming at you from Work in Progress Coworking in downtown Las Vegas. We're here to talk about growing your business, making more money, and thriving in a startup life. Here they are, Kurt and Kenny.
Hey everybody, I'm Kurt.
And I'm Kenny. Today's episode is going to be talking about co-working cost calculations. NeONBRAND grew up in co-working spaces, and now we own Work in Progress Coworking in downtown Las Vegas. Now that NeONBRAND has grown past the startup phase, we're still headquartered in a co-working space, and we have no intention of moving into a quote-unquote real office space for the foreseeable future. Obviously, we're pretty positive about the whole co-working thing, so we're going to talk about why that is. So even before Kurt and I were together, NeONBRAND, back in 2000, I think late 2012 would have been our first time into a co-working space, and it was Work in Progress. We moved into the 7th and Bridger location that they had at that time, and there were just four of us, grabbed a little table, 4 desks, Spencer and Mike, I think, and Wesley and me, and Greg. So there were 5 of us. I remember that really well. And we loved it for a lot of reasons. From there, we needed more space, so we moved to their 6th Street location, which is the only location that we still operate now. And we were in team room 6. Let me think. 3, 4, 5. Team room 5. And then eventually we outgrew that room and moved to team room 3. And then had a parting of ways with Work in Progress for a little while our favorite, most awesome secretary opened her own space over at a Cooperate on Main. And we love Nicole. She was awesome to us, and so she drug us over there, and we had a stellar deal and a great office space there. And then eventually ended up back over here when Work in Progress went up for sale and we needed a little bit more space. So we've had quite the history in the co-working field. Back when it was pretty new, 2012 would have been early co-working thing. That was not too common for people to know about. But there were a lot of reasons why, especially in that early stage, we chose co-working. Kurt came into it via NeONBRAND and has a very different perspective on co-working space and office space in general, having done a bunch of leases and other things for a bunch of different businesses over the years.
And so let's, at this point, let's assume that some of our listeners have no idea what co-working is.
Yeah.
To differentiate the way Kenny was operating his business, which was a marketing firm and a very socially active firm, and the way I was operating my firm, my consulting firm, where it was more analysis, less interactions, more very project-focused work for clients where I didn't need a lot of interaction and collaboration. I was in an office similar to what you'd find at a Regus. I was at a commercial office building that had been converted by a real estate group who, during the recession, needed a way to rent some of the space in the building that they owned, so they created office suites. And my office suite was about 150 square feet. It had a solid wood door and 1 window down a long hallway with a whole bunch of closed doors that I didn't interact with. Co-working, on the other hand, is this idea of openness and connections and collisions and all of the things that workplace, I don't know whether it's 2.0 or 8.0 or whatever number it is in between, promotes in its value of being able to offer you more than just a place to sit down and work.
Yeah. It was always a matter of, for us, like you said, we were more social. And so as soon as, if we were locked in our own rooms, it just made it to where we weren't as productive, it felt, when we were out sitting amongst the crowd. And even back when we first moved to Work in Progress, we opted for the tables out in the open co-working space over a team room because we wanted to be able to rub shoulders with other people that were doing cool things, and we wanted to be able to network more easily. The big benefit was networking is built into your co-working experience, whereas if you have an office suite, then you have to actually, which every business needs some level of networking, then you have to actively seek those networking opportunities, either before, after work, lunchtime, whatever it might have been. Co-working, you're networking practically all the day long. So that was a big reason for us to be over here, the networking aspect.
And so we led the podcast saying we're going to talk about cost calculations. And anytime you talk about cost, everybody thinks about the expense side of a business. But there are a lot of times where there's, well, in fact, in all cases of business, there are opportunity costs. And those opportunity costs are sometimes positive and they're sometimes negative. And the outcome on a business can either be a positive benefit or a negative benefit. So as we talk about cost today, don't automatically let your minds wander to those red marks on a balance sheet or an income statement that make you think negatively. In some cases, costs are a negative thing, but from our perspective, there are benefits to the costs of co-working, as well as, in my own opinion, which we'll get into in a minute, some negative costs to co-working at a certain level for a business. But the first of these really is, as a freelancer or a solo or a small team like Kenny's first team of 4, I think it's important to evaluate the costs associated with your co-working experience and landing your business in a co-working space, as opposed to maybe an executive suite type of a situation that I was in with my consulting firm initially. And then maybe even one more step past that is leasing a space of your own. Mm-hmm. So the first question, is it true that co-working is actually more expensive than an executive suite or getting a lease of your own?
Without digging into this, because I want to save the full discussion until the end of this whole podcast, but without digging into this up front, on paper, co-working usually costs more than a Regus type office space would cost. There are, one is 100, one is 50. There's a I don't know if it's that drastic, but there is a substantial difference between co-working spaces and typical office space. But now that that's aside, let's talk about some of the more fun stuff and then circle back as to why that might be the case, because that's where Kurt and I have the most fun discussing.
Okay, so I'm going to give you some latitude for a minute, and then I'm going to prove you wrong on some of your points, but that's okay. So let's start.
Well, one of your favorites is credibility. It's an interesting thing. You talk about small teams coming into co-working spaces like this. When you walk into a co-working space, let me walk you through the experience of a Regus type office space. Sorry, Regus, if you end up listening to this, I keep talking about you. Or a co-working space.
There is a place for Regus.
Yes, there is. So you walk into a Regus, the customer knows that you are a specific room inside of that building, and that everybody else is also sharing that. Your customer knows that everybody's in their own rooms and they're all a bunch of different businesses. You walk down the lonely corridor, go back to that room, open the door, close the door, and now you're with your customer, and your customer knows that this is your 300 square feet, your 150 square feet, whatever it might be. Different than when you walk into a co-working atmosphere. A co-working space usually has somebody sitting at the front desk that says, "Hey, what's up? Welcome. Who are you here to see? Cool. Okay, hang on. Have a seat. We'll get them right down here to you." Customer doesn't really know where your office starts and finishes. You come down the stairs or you come out the back and you say, "Hey, yeah, come on. Let's go grab a meeting room." You go in, you grab one of the meeting rooms. They're walking by all of these people feverishly working. They don't know which ones are yours and which ones aren't yours. They hope that most of the time they assume the best and think, "Man, these guys are doing well. Look at all these people here doing work. They must be a great company to work with." You go sit in a meeting room and you handle your business. The whole time, the customer never knows where your business starts and your business finishes. They just think somewhere in this mass sea of people is their business and they're doing great. So there's a definite credibility factor. They walk up to a big, nice building that looks great on the outside, great experience on the inside. All of a sudden, you as a freelance solo guy that may be barely getting by has a huge credibility factor because of the workplace that you are situated in. No?
I definitely agree with that. In terms of cost effectiveness, at this early stage of a business... Look at him,
jumping right back to the topic.
Well, imagine that. At this early stage of a business, whatever the cost is for a startup, for a freelancer, for a solo, maybe a small team, whatever the cost is, as long as it's competitive in the market, to me, it's worth paying. Because as a freelancer, if you're working out of your home, let's just say that you're a developer, you're a programmer, you're working out of your home, and you do really great work, and you catch a client that really shows off your value, which you then use in your portfolio. and you have a chance to catch a big client, maybe somebody that's 2 or 3 times bigger than anything you've ever done before, which is the goal of every entrepreneur, is to catch the next one and then ride a wave. So when that happens, where are you going to meet with that client?
Yeah.
Are you going to always travel to their office?
Starbucks.
Are you going to go to a coffee shop? Where are you going to go in order to demonstrate your value as a business? And in many cases, that next client that's 2 or 3 times bigger than what you've ever done before might require additional labor, might require some additional personnel to help. Well, how are you going to showcase those personnel? That's, to me, where co-working provides immense value at the startup or the early stage of any business. And
credibility.
And you may pay a couple of $100, but you get super fast Wi-Fi. In most cases, you get great coffee. You have meeting rooms like you described earlier, but
which Kurt and I drink a lot of that coffee. We're such coffee drinkers.
Yeah. The smell of it, that's about as close as it gets for us. But the feel that comes along with being in a professional space is critical. And we could probably debate the type of co-working space that you should choose for your business.
That's one of those incalculable costs of co-working, really, is how much that credibility really is worth. I mean, if it were as simple as credibility is the only difference between a Regis and a co-working space, then sure, you can do that math pretty easily. It's $200 more, then it's a $200 upsell for credibility. So yeah, that one's okay. The next best one is the connections that we make while we're working here. Now, this is probably one of my favorites, especially because I love downtown Las Vegas. I've been here for forever now. I'm born and raised in Nevada, or in Las Vegas. Connections, for me, has been one of the best parts. So way back when we first started, I met a bunch of the downtown project guys, the Vegas Tech Fund guys, rubbed shoulders with all of those people early on in their whole process, which didn't necessarily pay immediate dividends. I didn't become a Zapponian or do any of that other DTP stuff that was happening back then, but I became casual acquaintances with a lot of these guys that would have been really hard for me to do otherwise. And over the course of many years, I've now developed relationships with those guys that have led to us running the VegasTech.com website, has led to us actually running and owning Work in Progress. That would have never happened had I not rubbed shoulders with those guys way back in the early days, amongst a myriad of other clients that have come our way and great employees that have come our way due to the connections that we developed working in a co-working space. We do still have your suite up in the Northwest that we work out of from time to time, and it's after having worked in co-working spaces for so long, and I go up there to work every once in a while, it's such a different experience for me. I forget what working in that type of an office environment is like. I feel so lonely, and it's weird because even while I'm doing the work, it's fine. It's quiet and great, and I can focus and get stuff done maybe more easily than I can in a co-working space. But the second I want to go say hi to somebody, there's nobody to go say hi to. There's nobody to bump into. No water cooler talk, which is a real thing at co-working spaces, where I'll go to lunch out in the Northwest and it's cold and lonely. I pull up to the drive-thru and drive back and sit in my cold and lonely office, where when I'm here, I walk down the street, I walk out, I find somebody that's going to lunch too. We go grab lunch and have a good lunch conversation. The connections that you develop working out of co-working spaces versus typical office or even working out of your home are another incalculable way that co-working is better than your typical office or home office.
Well, I think I've always, even though it may sound to the listeners that I'm a negative,
cold-hearted, evil. Which other words should I use?
I've liked over the years. I've liked having the quietness and the serenity of a space that I'm not interrupted on, especially when I'm doing a valuation or a pro forma or something that requires me to be laser focused on formulas and calculations and numbers and evaluation criteria to value a business, because one little mistake early on in the process can completely skew your model, and
I get that. Same thing happens with development. Same thing happens with development. I feel that same pain.
So, even though there's a place for both, I think in a co-working space, the ideal co-working space, there's those places where you can go to be private. And what I've also learned about the younger, the generation just a little younger than me in the workforce, is they put headphones on. and they stare at their screen, and they go to a place that is as quiet and as focused as if I was in that room. So I definitely think that's there. Also, on the connections, it's interesting. We recently had a client come to us. We typically deal in the softer parts of business, and we don't do widgets. Well, that's not exactly true because we own Preserve a Mission. We actually do make books for missionaries, but we don't
Typically,
build stuff.
we don't do hardware.
We don't build stuff.
We're
not a hardware company. We're more of a software company. And a potential client reached out to us just, I think it was a week ago, maybe 10 days ago, and they have this really great idea that requires a widget for us to build an app to communicate with customers. And
Kurt, just sidebar real quick. Sad thing about using the word widget is that software has stolen that from you, and we call widgets software widgets all the time. So,
but those of us that are traditionally steeped in business and
I'm just
economics
saying,
understand
some people
that
are going to be
widgets
confused.
are things, physical things. Yes, sorry for the tech crowd. Widgets in business school used to be things that economists use to describe cars and planes and air conditioners. So
the cobwebs are falling off of his shoulders right now.
Yeah, there's your old reference. There you go. You worked it in. Congratulations. You worked it in. But it requires a piece of hardware to connect to the internet so that an application can be used in a consumer's home. So, our sales gal came up and she said, "Look, this is what they want." And my first response was, "We don't do hardware." And then it occurred to me that about 25 feet away from me sits a guy at Work in Progress who has a desk full of gadgets and electrical components and circuit boards and all kinds, and soldering irons and all kinds of crazy stuff sitting at his desk. So he wasn't there at the time, but a couple of days later, I approached him and I told him what this client was wanting to do. And in a matter of about 3 minutes, he'd actually pulled out a computer that was about the size of, I don't know, one was the size of a credit card. The other one was the size of a flash drive. And then in about 5 minutes, he'd already produced how he was going to connect it to the particular device that this client was going to need in order to be able to connect it to the internet for their application to work for people. So those connections can be invaluable. Yeah. Just today, as I was standing around the water cooler, I was making coffee for people today, even though I don't drink it, but I was making it for people. And had a conversation with a guy that's he's an attorney who works for a doctor, and I've had a lot of experience working with doctors over the years, who needs marketing help. So just those are certainly the kinds of things that a co-working membership can give you that you're not going to find in a more structured office suite environment, executive suite environment.
Which goes to that other incalculable cost or benefit of working in a co-working space.
Which I would argue that's actually calculable now, because
sometimes
I can actually now calculate if those people become
if
clients.
You're tracking your leads correctly like we do, then yes you could.
Then I can actually track the actual benefit of that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Back to my point, it's all calculable.
That's good. Of course.
If it's not, it's
Math.
not real. Yeah. So connections are big. Connections are a big part of it. But I think connections oftentimes in our co-working space and others that we've worked in are also a function of culture.
Yeah.
What is the culture that's being cultivated in that co-working space? And we look at different co-working spaces across the country. There's obviously big corporate ones out there. Ours is obviously ours. We're smaller scale, although growing. Here to announce that we have a second location coming on board in downtown Las Vegas within the next 30 days, which is kind of fun. But ours is a little smaller scale right now, and so we have a strong focus on what does this place need to feel like for people to feel like they belong. So my experience in co-working has been a little bit it's a little more shallow than Kenny's is. I've worked in it less, but in the two co-working spaces I've worked in, the first one to me really appealed to my more traditional nature. There was cubicles, and there was a big glass conference room, and it was a little less
collaborative,
open and collaborative.
Right.
Although we did have good friendships,
but it was great,
and great connections over there, not to disparage it in any way. Whereas this culture, I think, sort of harkens back a little bit to that downtown project genesis, where it was like, let's get together and have cool ideas and let's have cool things. We have the one group over here that's constantly staring at the ceiling with their virtual reality goggles on. It looks totally weird unless you know what they're doing. So I think culture is an important part of how people connect.
Yeah, the culture of WIP, especially WIP being work in progress, has gone through probably 3 phases now of different kinds of culture, where it started off early days, it was a bunch of buddies running the joint, and they were having a great old time, and things were exciting, and they were part of the Downtown Project, and Downtown Project was using this as one of their showcases for all the celebrities and very wealthy people that came through town and showing them what was going on in downtown Las Vegas. So that was a really exciting time. I remember that really well. The dinners, just everything. It was a fun place to be. Then it went through a second phase where that kind of got pulled back, and it went through, I don't know if it was survival mode maybe, where it was just trying to get by after all that fun kind of wore off. The price tag of doing all those things wasn't worth it as much anymore, and so costs were cut, things were streamlined, and that really did a number on the culture for a little while, as far as the culture being a fun and exciting place. And now we're trying to come back in the middle of those 2 arenas, where we do things in a way that allows us to thrive and make money and have the place make a revenue stream that made sense, but also have fun and do things that get everybody collaborating and doing fun things again. So I'd say culture is hugely important, and one of those things that is very hard to find outside of a co-working space. Granted, companies that eventually lease their own buildings and get big enough to where they can have their own culture is great. That's a thing for sure. But when you're little and you're starting off as a person of 1 or 2 people, what kind of culture do you have at that phase? You can have one, sure, but it's a little hard to be as grandiose and do as much fun of the things that you want to do.
Well, and that's an interesting point too, because I don't know if you were to define the culture at Work in Progress now compared to what it was, that's probably a subjective thing. But here's what we hear from.
No, I'm very objective. I know exactly what it's like.
I'm sure. Here's what we're hearing from the members now. That the feel of progress and movement and people connecting with people and ideas being generated and people being able to use a network to get what they want from their business is something that people are feeling here on a day-to-day basis. And people are literally connecting on a routine basis to make their business better. Yeah. And, whether it's our pitch nights or whether it's our meetups that come in here, people are starting to find ways to enhance and grow their business, which the ideal for us is that we're a place where people can start their business and grow out. Yeah. We know that we're not forever for everyone, and if we are, that's great. But, our hope is that this is an environment that we've been able to take advantage of in co-working, which allows us to scale.
Well, yeah, so you're talking about flexibility. Even since the beginning, we had 4 people, and we're still in co-working. We're at like 15 or 16, whatever it is now. So, and we're still in co-working. So it's allowed us to grow where typically, and it did happen to us. You lease a building, you think you're at a team of 6 and you're going to be there for a while. So let's lease a building. Well, leases are 5 years long. Are you going to be in the same team of 6 for 5 years? Probably not. Okay, so you plan ahead. You say, we'll grow up to 10 people in this building. But now you're overpaying for the space you have. You have space for 4 extra people that you don't have, may never have, and you're paying extra there across the length of the term. And heaven forbid you grow faster than you projected, and now you're too big for your thing. So now you have to get out of your lease and find another building, where co-working allows for that flexibility to go, okay, we have 4 people right now. We're going to have 5. Here, add another desk. There's their 5th. Okay, add another. There's 6. Ooh, we had to let 2 people go. We're back down to 4. Another important point that we didn't mention is typically most co-working spaces are all month to month. So like a gym membership for your office is what we say all the time. So, you add a desk one month, you take it away the next. It doesn't affect your bottom line. You're allowed
let me contrast that with a specific example relative to cost. So when we were doing our search for us to move NeONBRAND into a permanent lease, we realized that our team at the present time was too big for where we were, but it was about a third as big as we wanted it to be ultimately.
And on the trajectory we were going, it was going to be quickly bigger than
within 18 to 24
Yeah,
months, we'd be looking for another lease. Well, nobody wants to sign a lease for a year.
Yeah.
No one wants to lease you a building for a year. So we ran into this place that had scaled up about a 10,000 square foot footprint, and they were using about a third of it when their business slowed down and they had to get out of it, with 4.5 years left on their lease.
Yep.
Well, if that was a co-working environment, then they would have been in a space that they could have expanded or contracted without all of the extra obligations and liabilities on their balance sheet. But now they have, I don't know what their lease is, they have a $30,000, $20,000, $30,000 hit on their income statement every single month
That they are not using.
that is
At
empty
all.
to this day.
Yeah.
It's still empty. So the expandability is important. So for startups and teams that are experiencing the growth curve, which it's typical for businesses to grow too fast and then to cut back and then to grow again and then to cut back and then to grow again and cut back. That environment, being able to do that in a co-working space, makes it so that you don't ever have to worry about the liability and being chased if you have to cut your business back, if you have to do layoffs. So lots of advantages, lots of benefits to being in a co-working space. Per square foot, per person, in the early stages of a co-working arrangement, it may be more expensive than if you had your own lease space. However, when you sum up the liabilities and the cash flows associated with being responsible for that month in and month out for 60 months, it's a pretty fair trade, in my opinion. It's a pretty fair exchange. Up until, Kenny's ready for the argument. I can see it in his eyes now. Up until a business reaches a certain size in employees and a certain revenue that makes it so it doesn't make sense for a co-working space. And every business has to evaluate that based on their own revenues and their own expenses. But I think co-working plays a role, even though Kenny thinks that co-working is the new future of office space permanently.
Well, don't put words in my mouth, but I'm pretty sure. No, I agree. I do agree at some point, although I think it's probably bigger than you might think. It starts to make sense once.
Okay, so let's draw some points on this. Let's give him for example. Let's give him something that we argue about all the time. As I look at a team of 20, I think to myself, that's probably about the size where a business in today's environment would be sensible to either buy or lease office space in a permanent situation.
And my argument there is 20 people. If you move to your own office space, you immediately lose all of the connections and all of the culture. You have to come up with your own culture. The credibility now, you have to build yourself as far as your space is concerned. There's a lot of overhead costs with getting desks and decorations and build-outs that are expensive there. And who's to say your team of 20 isn't going to be 40 in a year? And now you need another space entirely. So if you're willing to give up all those things by bringing them onto your own site, like if you're going to have culture, then you have to have somebody probably dedicated to culture type events. So that's a huge expense. Let's say it's $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year employee to make sure you're having all the cultural elements included. Now, let's say that you have to have all the furniture and everything taken care of. I mean, there's $100,000 easy to do a build out and
that's a down payment
put all the furniture in.
For furniture these days.
What's the cost of exiting a lease early and getting a new space? Say you grow too fast, or say you contract, or say you shrink down, or you downsize. Say you're expanding. You have a lot of action going on in a new city. You move your team of 20 customer service reps over to that city because you're going to start servicing there, but it doesn't work out as planned. Now all of a sudden you have a lease for 5 years, and you have the scenario of the building that's over here. So while I agree, eventually there's probably a point where somebody says, yes, we're forever going to have 20 people. It makes more sense for us to do our own culture stuff. We don't need the networking anymore. We want to have our own stuff and our own people. We want them to be secluded and by themselves. Eventually that might make sense. I just don't think it makes sense as often as it might. There's always upside to having people in a co-working space.
As a counterpoint to that, let's just take your example for our case here. I'm at 20. I grow to 40. I can't grow to 40 unless I'm either clinically insane or have massive amounts of investor money betting on the future, or my revenues are growing so swiftly.
I mean, that's not overnight, but that's over the course of 2 years.
And that's not like the scenario we discussed before. That scenario was, I have 30
25
people,
and you close it down.
and I need 5. In that scenario, if I'm growing that fast, I am more than happy to work out my landlord a sublease. At that point, it's worth it to me because, in addition, as a contrary to co-working, even though there are those extra hassles, right? Being a landlord is not always fun. It's not always easy, right? Even though you have to pay the utility, the CAMs or the utility bill, even though you have to pay for the internet, per unit, it's less expensive than a co-working space. And so even if I have to scale that up, per unit, it's less. So
unless you calculate in all the stuff that we can't calculate, the connections, the whatever we said, culture, flexibility, all of those things, unless there's a value to those that we can't assign directly.
yeah, so you have to make a subjective decision on that point. For me, as I look at the balance sheet, I say, all right, and the income statement, I'm looking at it saying, if I'm going from 20 to 40, I have got something working, and I have found my customer base, and I am maximizing my value to that customer base to the extent that those connections may not mean as much to me now as they did when I had 5 people on my team.
Yeah.
So at some point, the connections have less value
Yeah.
than
At some point.
actually being able to manage your own culture, and to the point of having quote unquote to create your own culture and manage your own culture. Well, that is the very definition of great leadership, is when you have created a culture where people are dying to work for you.
Yeah, and we hope everybody has that, but lots of companies are going to have to pay for that. Like, if
But
they
every
want
great
that,
business
then they
writer
pay
would
for
tell
that.
you
that
that is
the
a
best
key
kind of
to your
culture
business
is for sure.
success.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
culture does matter. So an investment in culture of, in your case, maybe call it a full-time equivalent
Yeah.
of $40,000 a year. If investing $40,000 a year results in increased employee productivity of 20 to 30%,
Which gives you
I'm
savings
happy to
on
sink
the
that cost in.
employees. Yeah.
I'm happy to sink it. So, whatever the number is, at the end of the day, the business has to evaluate what that number is for me, and my point of view, and based on my experience, I'm looking at a team of 20. I'm looking at the amenities that they need to have, like coffee and water and kitchen and break room and common areas to connect with their employees and receptionists and stuff. By the time you get to 20, you've already got the receptionist.
Maybe.
You do, right? You do. You've got
We have
somebody
teams of 20 here that don't have their own receptionist.
Who's we do not have a team of 20 here yet.
Close.
Yeah,
Like
close only counts in
15.
horseshoes and hand grenades.
Yeah.
Stage
Okay.
kisses, maybe. But whatever that number is, each business has to evaluate that. But for
All
my money,
I know is I have loved it. It's to not go. I'm bored of his numbers. So it has been the best thing for our company, especially, and I think for a lot of companies, in being a part of something bigger than your own little bubble. Like there's a karma, there is some weird thing that happens when you are not locked in a room and you are rubbing shoulders and even helping other people. Like we help in the same way that guy is going to help us than your example from earlier. We've helped a lot of other people fix websites or do random things that have worked alongside of us because that's just what you do. You become friends and you start to become more than just casual acquaintances with the people that you work in your office space with, which has real monetary value somewhere down the line. If that's the only concern.
I don't disagree with that at all. I'm just not going to be a sellout to the fact that co-working is going to redefine the entire workplace in American business.
So let's talk about that as a last point. This wasn't on our list of talking points, but what is the future of co-working? Now, I don't want to give away my cool idea that I had the other day that you're still not on board with. We won't spoil that one yet because it's not fully formed.
It's math.
It's not fully
kids.
formed. It's not
This
fully
is my
formed.
public service announcement
not fully
to all of
formed.
the kids who listen to this.
When I
all
make a
2 of them.
gajillion dollars without
math.
Kurt, you will know that this is the point where it happened.
He can't without me.
But
That's
the future of
problem.
co-working. The future of co-working. What is it? What does it look like? I think it is. There is something to be said. Business owners want to be business owners. They don't want to be landlords or tenants. All the headache and hassle that comes with those items of connecting your own internet, making sure your Wi-Fi works, making sure you have coffee, making sure you do all of these things as a owner of a space are real burdens on people. What people want to do is, I went to school to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer. I don't want to have to worry about all that other crap. I'll pay a little bit of a premium on my monthly rent so that I know that you're taking care of it and I don't have to. I think there's a real space for that across in every single industry. Name your space, and I'll come up with a reason why it's better. Eventually, I don't think the world is ready for that yet. I agree with it. I don't think the financiers, the guys like you that are writing the checks, are not on board with that yet because this math doesn't work out that well in that scenario. I agree, but I think once people start realizing you can offload that burden of managing a space to somebody else, they'll be knocking down the door trying to get us to come manage their workspace.
I agree with that. I agree with that entirely. It would be disingenuous for me to say that co-working isn't a catalyst. I do believe it's a catalyst, but I don't think it is. I'm not sure that for every industry, or for any industry for that matter, that it is the ultimate destination. But if you want to get to the ultimate destination, I think you're going to be hard pressed to do it. If you're starting with an idea right now or a small team, you're going to be hard pressed to get to where you need to be in today's economy and in the economy of the future. If you aren't in a place like co-working that gives you some professional credential.
In the future, it will be a stepping stone for every industry. At some point, every industry will have worked out of some type of co-working space. And co-working spaces don't have to look like our space or any space that even exists right now, in my mind. Co-working space could be a bunch of contractors working out of a dingy industrial complex. That could be a co-working space. So I think eventually everybody will work through that phase of business, even though they aren't right now, when I just need to work on my crap. I don't want to think about everything else. Give me a desk, give me some internet, and let me go to town. That will happen across the board. I guarantee it. I'm going to fuel it with my cool idea that I'm not going to tell you about right now.
Guarantee, yeah. All right, I'll take that guarantee. You know what Tommy Boy said about guarantees.
Oh, I should. I don't remember the movie.
That's a little bold. The guarantee is a little bold.
Wait, I didn't guarantee. You threw out the guarantee word.
You said I guarantee.
Oh, I did?
Yes, it's recorded too. No, this is on you.
Dang.
Yeah, you can't pull that back now. It's digital. But
I'm going to do it.
No, I think the growth of our business is directly attributable to being in a place where it could grow and we could nurture it. And co-working is a catalyst for that. Tremendous value in it. You won't find me ever saying that there is no value in co-working. And that's not just because I'm being a sellout because I own a co-working business, but
when you put on your finance hat, it's hard to do the math. When you put on the business hat.
At a certain point.
When you put on the business hat.
At a certain point.
Even early on, I mean, it doesn't math-wise, it's more expensive to work out of a co-working spot. So it's hard to look at your books and say, I can go get a space that's $500 a month, or I could go do co-working for almost twice that. Like, that math is hard. You can do the math and add up, okay, I got to pay for my own internet, I got to pay for all these things and get close to the right numbers, but there is a premium that's paid by working out of a co-working space. So it is hard, even at any stage, to say, is this worth it? But from what we have seen, there are so many other value adds working out of a co-working space that does make it worth it. And I know you're on board with that. I know you understand that.
If you're at the early stage, you just need to believe what we say.
Yeah.
Just trust us on this one. It is worth it at the early stage. At the later stage,
it gets harder. It gets harder.
When I say you need to do some critical valuation on it.
Yes, it gets much harder to decide whether it's worth it. But
well, there we go. We've had our weekly fight.
I wish you guys could see our hands flinging around the room in here.
Yeah.
I almost smacked Kurt twice. It was great. All right, that's it. That was fun. Co-working cost calculations. I don't know if we even came up with a conclusion, but it is one of our favorite things. We've done it since the beginning and continue to do it now and don't see any way of getting out of it in the foreseeable future. So come try us out. We do day passes down here. We'll hook you up if you mention the podcast. We'll give you a free day down here and let you see what it's like to work out of a co-working space. It's pretty fun. See you next time.
Later.